Another outstanding episode of the Square Table Degenerates. As always, I'm your host, Joe Edibles. Today we are joined by WWF, now WWE, whatever the hell it's called, legend, famously of the tag team, the Killer Bees, Mr. Jumping Jim Brunzell. How are you today, sir?
Very good, Joe. Thanks for having me on.
That's awesome, man. We were chatting it up a little bit in the show. We probably it would be cool if you guys could saw that. It's always fun when we're off camera. You know how that goes.
Well, it's funny. I spent the last, I think, 8 years in the WWE, and it's funny. I didn't have a real good taste in my mouth when I was there or when I left, but that's the way the wrestling ball rolled, in terms of Vince, and all of a sudden, 26 territories, and then you're down to one. So that was it. If you wanted to be a wrestler, you had to go to New York.
And to talk to Mr. Vinnie Mac. Yes, so you, man, it seems like I looked it up and said you're Minnesota, and you were just talking about Minnesota, so you were born there.
Yes.
We were just 2 guests ago. Carl Mecklenburg was on. He was up in Minnesota.
Oh, sure.
So, seems like we got all these Minnesota guys. So what we got to ask the stereotypical Minnesota questions. Now, you got all them lakes up there. We were just talking about fishing. Were you growing up, were you just like your family ice fish? Like, how many brothers and sisters do you have coming up? What did you guys do?
Well, I had one sister, but my dad was in the Navy, so he was we were all over the country. I lived out in the South Pacific in 1956 in a place called Kwajalein Atoll, which was out in the Marshall Islands, and it was the island was a mile long and 3/4 of a mile wide, and it was all coral. And the Japanese during World War II had maintained this island, and when my dad flew air sea rescue, he flew seaplanes, and that's where he was stationed. So we were out there for a year when I was 5 or 6 years old, and it was 85 degrees every day.
I knew
no school either. No school.
I knew a girl in the service. She was from the Marshall Islands. That's crazy. That is so wild. There's only 30,000 people or something like that. It's a small little place.
Cripe. There's a string of islands, and they have a number of people, and they're all those islanders, like the Tonga people that got into wrestling, and it was it was just an experience. And now that that Kwajalein Atoll is Nike Zeus missile base. So we have defensive missiles there.
Nice. Now, was there a beach on this little atoll? What did you get to do when you run around there for a year or so?
Well, as I 5.5 or 6 years old, so the only thing we could do was run around on the beach. And every Saturday they used to come and pick us up by a bus, and they'd bring us to the base. And they had no TV or radio there, so what they would do is they would have some sort of a piped-in deal, so you'd find out what was going on in the real world. So you'd go there, and they'd have cartoons and different shows, and so that's what we look forward to.
That's awesome, man. That's so awesome. I didn't know that at all. There's not. Your Wikipedia. I glanced over, and there's basic stuff, but I didn't know about your dad being in the Navy, and you spent a couple years with some. What other base did you go to after the islands there?
Well, I'll tell you, we were. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, and my dad was stationed down there. I was in California. I was in Memphis, Tennessee. I was in Quantico, Virginia. And let me see, there was a couple other places. But basically, my dad retired in 1962 or 3, and that's when I found my roots in a place called White Bear Lake, Minnesota. So that's basically where I've been off and on, for the rest of my life. And then, I ventured down to the Mid-Atlantic, and my wife and my 2 kids were down there with me when I wrestled for Jim Crockett in 1979 and 1980. And then I came back and worked for Vern from 81 till 85 again. And then I made the transition to New York, like so many other guys did.
Now, how many? Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, one sister.
Was she older or younger?
Older, 2 years.
Okay. What did she end up doing? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Well, it's funny. Every family has this, but my sister and I have been estranged for probably 20 some years. And it's just something that I've accepted and she's accepted. So, I mean, there's always mental illness in every family, and apparently she has it.
Hey, you can't gloss over. I mean, people are.
That's true. Yeah.
All right, we got a question from. Oh wait, hold on. This was we had an earlier question. I just was on. It says, "Did you wrestle any of the Von Erichs?"
No, but I was with Kerry when Kerry came to New York. The bookers there wanted him to ride with me because he was sort of a wild character. He needed to be chaperoned a little bit. He was a great talent and just a physical specimen. And so he was with me for about the first 2 or 3 weeks. And we basically stayed in I think it was Howard Johnson's in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And we'd make all the towns. And he was a good kid. He's incredibly talented a lot of people don't realize this, but Kerry Von Erich was a national schoolboy record holder in the discus. He threw the discus like 203 feet when he was in high school, which is incredible.
I couldn't even throw a discus from here to the wall.
Sure you could.
I probably could.
Your shoulder might hurt though afterwards.
Now, where did you end up going to high school, or was your dad still in the service when you were in high school?
Well, my dad retired from the Navy and then worked for Minnesota Mining 3M, and he was a security. Worked for security for probably about 7-8 years. So we laid our foundations in White Bear Lake, and I went to White Bear Lake High School. First 2 years of high school, I went to a Catholic school called Hill High School. And then I transferred over to White Bear because I wanted to have a better opportunity of playing football. So that's what I did. And I played football, basketball, and track through high school. So then when I went to the University of Minnesota, I played football and I was a high jumper in track. There's your buddy.
There's Mr. Rickman. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing excellent.
Welcome to the party. He's got a Forever Wrestling is Forever hat on. It says, okay, nice.
I don't know if you can see this, but I resurrected this. This is a drop kick picture of me, Nick Bockwinkel here.
Wow.
It was that was taken off the photo. And Nick was a great wrestler, great world champion, and one who I considered in the top 5, of all the guys I ever was in the ring with.
Good old, and it was AWA. Was that Nick Bockwinkel?
AWA, yes.
That's awesome, man. All right, we got a question from Jim. He says, "What was your record for the high school high jump?"
My indoor record was 6'4" and a quarter, and that was 1966. And it got broken a couple years later. And then outdoors, it was 6'4", 6'5". And then when I went to college, I jumped 6'6", and the best I ever did was 6'7.5", which was, I didn't do the Fosbury flop. I did what they did, a dive straddle. So, I had about 36.5-inch vertical lift. So I could jump, and I was just a little too tight to really go higher. I would have loved to try to jump 7 feet, but I just mechanically I couldn't get my body. I could jump that high, but I just couldn't turn my body to get over the bar.
Now, how tall are you?
6 feet 1/2 inch.
Now, so can you dunk or back then? Can you dunk a basketball?
Oh God, yes, yeah.
Oh, nice.
Matter of fact, my high school coach got a little upset with me because on all the layups, I used to dunk every layup. And he sort of thought I was, sort of showing off a little bit. But I said, hey, I mean, at one time, well, we had 4 or 5 guys on our team that could dunk. The whole starting 5 could dunk, and that is pretty impressive. Plus, it's a little intimidating when the other team says, "Hey, these guys can jump," So
especially back in high school.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Hold on. We got a question from Jim. He says, "What was it like to train with?" Well, no. Actually, we could probably combine this question into the question I was going to ask. Kind of what got you initially? You probably asked us 1,000 times, but to establish a baseline, we got to find out, what Jumping Jim Brunzell was about. What got you into the wrestling business? What was the passion of it? And was that your first inference with Vern Gagne? Was it like training that guy?
Well, originally, I went to the university as a walk-on. I didn't get a scholarship. I wanted to play there my whole life. I met Greg Gagne, who was a walk-on quarterback. I was a walk-on wide receiver. So he and I, our freshman year, we couldn't play as freshmen, and this was back in 1967. So in all of our scrimmages and games that we played amongst ourselves, he was a quarterback and I was the wide receiver, and we became very good friends. Plus, we did really well together. He could throw the ball, and I managed to catch it, and we did pretty well. So after his sophomore year, Greg transferred to Wyoming because he wasn't going to play quarterback at the University of Minnesota. So I stayed at Minnesota. I wound up starting my junior year, played a lot. And then I had an opportunity to try out with the Washington Redskins in 1971 for a free agent tryout. Didn't make it. Came back home. Never got asked back. So Greg called me and he told me, he said, my dad, Vern Gagne at this time, was breaking in Ken Patera, who just came back from the 72 Olympics, is a weightlifter, and then Khosrow Vaziri, who was the Iron Sheik. He was a wrestler from Iran. And then Nature Boy Ric Flair was a schoolboy wrestling champion for a private high school in Wisconsin. And then we had Bob Bruggers, who was a football player at the University of Minnesota and played in the NFL with San Diego Chargers. So there was a nucleus of 5 of us that started this camp back in 1972. And it was tough. Billy Robinson, who was a British Empire champion, was sort of a sadistic character, and he used to run roughshod on us, and then Vern had come. Our camp was 6 days a week, and it was 6 hours a day, and it was really physical. And I think that almost all of us out of that group were successful.
Yeah.
Bobby Bruggers wound up in a plane crash and broke his back, and he couldn't wrestle anymore. So, but Flair, Khosrow, Ken Patera, Greg, and I, we did pretty well.
Now, out of your class, your circle of trainees coming out of camp, who do you think was the best prepared to have a professional career?
Ric Flair by far.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, the reason why is because he had his life through high school and a couple of years of college sort of personified the life on the road of a wrestler. And he just fit right in, he was a real character, and that's why he's done so well, and, he's still involved now. He's 73 years old. He's still popping up here and there. And once in a while,
training with Jay Lethal.
Yeah. I don't know what he's doing. I heard he got dropped off a couple different, I can't remember where it was. Maybe AEW or something, that they dropped him because of a deal that happened, 10, 20 years ago on an airplane. But, Rick will be the same. He's the same that he was, when he was 19 years old. And a lot of people would say, they saw that 30-30 on him, and it was he sacrificed everything for the business of pro wrestling. And a lot of people have asked me, they said, do you think he'd do it over again? I said, absolutely.
That's no doubt.
He wouldn't change the thing.
Now, I got to ask, I wasn't even going to talk about Ric Flair. This is actually an interesting question. Now, if Ric Flair was in a room with like me, you, and Joe here, would he be able to talk with us like, yeah, it's just a gimmick, I'm doing this? Or would he really be like, whoa, I'm doing, would he really be a character?
No, he's about as extroverted as possible. He by the end of an hour and a half, you think he was your best buddy. He's very personable. And he, that's the way, that's why he's been so successful. He's been able to maneuver himself, which is, you have to be able to do that in pro wrestling. You have to be able to maneuver yourself, with the booker and the promoter and etc. And he was the king of that. When we were down in North Carolina, they had him and Ricky Steamboat and Jimmy Snuka, and that and Roddy Piper. He left right before I came, but they had an incredible territory. And Rick was, he was U.S. champion, and then, it wasn't too much longer, then he became the NWA champion.
Oh yeah. We got a question from Shar. She says, "What is your favorite music?"
Well, that's easy. Bruce Springsteen. I've been a heck of a fan of Bruce's for, 45, 47 years. So I've seen a lot of people in concert, but after I saw Bruce, and my wife and I have seen Bruce probably between 60 and 70 times in the last, since 1975. So, I've been able to get to meet Bruce and see him and be backstage with him many times. And he's a great guy and just an incredible talent. And it's funny. I don't have my book. I was going to hold up my book. It's called Matlands. And there's a couple, there's probably about 3 or 4 pages on Bruce Springsteen in there. And it's sort of this book I wrote by myself in 2015, and it's available on Blurb, which is online. It's BLURB, Blurb, and it's $25. So it's funny because after I do these podcasts, I always sell 20 of them. So thanks, Joe, for having me on.
Definitely. Somebody out there, I'm as people know, my brain goes in and out because I smoke a lot. So like somebody in the chat, remind me later. I'll link the book in the description here, so people can take a look at it and definitely purchase it if you like it.
Yeah.
Now Blurb. I was going to go back to something.
.com. Well, while he's thinking about that, sing us a couple lines from your favorite Springsteen song. Let's hear your vocals.
Well, I can't sing, and I wanted to play guitar when I was younger. I told my dad after seeing Elvis Presley, I said, Dad, I want to be just like him. And I was like 6, 7 years old. So what does he do? He brings me to a music store and he buys me an accordion. Because he's like Lawrence Welk. So he thought maybe I might be Myron Florin playing the old squeeze box. But I wrote a song called Matlands, and it's about wrestling, but I took it from Bruce's Badlands. And the lyrics are sort of corny, but they show how the wrestling world is. I said, I don't want to be rich. I just want to be free. And in the wrestling world, that's a curse to me, because you can never be free in the wrestling world, because you're always looking for that next day and the next, big gimmick or the best, you're going to have a deal with so-and-so. And, you have to be projecting forward. So a lot of times you miss out on things.
And I know what I was going to ask. Now, did you get to meet like Max Weinberg in the Max Weinberg 7?
Yeah. Matter of fact, I just saw Max. I talked to him. He played. Matter of fact, he's coming back here June 26th. He's got the Max Weinberg Jukebox Band, and it wound up and it's a place called the Dakota Jazz Club. in Minneapolis, and I got these seats, and I had a friend of mine who was a rock and roll singer from Minneapolis, and he wound up, being my guest, and we sat right next to Max. Max's, drum kit was right next to us, and I talked to him off and on during the show, and it's funny because each of these guys normally have their own locker room, and behind stage, and I always would see Bruce. And some of the guys, I met Steve Van Zandt and the guitar player. I'm trying to think of his name now. Doggone it. Oh, shoot. Little guy. Used to play with Neil Young, Crazy Horse. I can't think of it right now. But it was just funny that the people in the band, all go their own way. I mean, they have like Clarence Clemens. I see Clarence, he's in a golf cart, and he had a great big goblet of red wine. It must be about 18 ounces of wine in there. And he was just happy as heck after the show. But, I basically, stayed close to Bruce. So, but yeah, Max is great. I mean, he had a heck of a little band with him, and they never have a set schedule. They have what you do is you fill out a piece of paper when you get there, your request, and he takes the request and he plays 23 songs strictly from the request from the people.
Nice.
That's how many, and he was fun. I mean, it was just fun to watch him, he's a great player.
Did you see the meme, the Bruce Springsteen meme, where it says, how ironic is it that a guy called the Boss is supposed to be a hero of the working class people? That was funny.
Well, he's been the heart and soul and voice of working class people because, he's talked about in his songs about, what's gone on and how people have suffered and how, different companies and, have gone out of business. And I know where he was from, Freehold, New Jersey. They had a lot of problems with the different corporations, folding up and people being without a work. But, he also, I think it was in the early 80s, he became a friend to somebody involved in the Vietnam Veterans War. And he gave them a check for $100,000 after a show in California, and basically saved their Vietnam veterans. I mean that.
Oh yeah, well, the song "Born in USA" is about
Yes.
at the VA hospital in the 80s.
Yep.
And one could argue, and you just brought up that Bruce Springsteen kind of brought plight attention to the VA and kind of saved the VA in a way. Obviously,
Exactly.
budget funding and this and that. I mean, the budget. I know a lot about the VA personally.
Okay.
We won't say who works for me or who I work for. All right, we got a question from Captain here. It says, Jim, which wrestler in particular do you think could have been an all-time great if they hadn't died young?
Oh my God, Kurt Hennig.
Oh, good one.
Definitely.
He comes up every time we ask.
Kurt was incredible. I mean, he had it all. I mean, he could talk. He had the body. He was incredible in the ring. There's a lot of guys that died so doggone, prematurely because of this business and because of the, the part, went with the business, just like, society. I mean, drugs and alcohol and all that, is part of society, and that, in the 80s were horrible. I remember the guys, there was a number of guys who I won't mention, but they'd smoke crack cocaine every night, $500 worth, every single night, and they'd stay up all night. Wow. And then, you'd see them on the plane the next day, and they had mustard on their face, and, and were yelling at each other. But, and that's the way it was. Yeah. And Vince knew that, he knew that there was a problem. And a matter of fact, I have a letter someplace that they used to give to all the retired wrestlers that they fired, and said if you have an alcohol or drug problem, that we will help you, go through, which was nice, but it's what happened when, people don't realize this, but when Hulkamania took over in 83 or 84, whatever it was, and everybody came to New York, there was 60 guys and there was 3 towns running every night. And there was 20 guys in each town. And there was guys, Brian Blair and I wrestled 52 straight days without a day off. Cosro, the Iron Sheik, went 91 days. And for 3.5 years, the Killer Bees averaged 27 days a month on the road.
It was Beefcake was telling us. He said 1 year was like 500 days. 500
yeah, it's ridiculous. So they'd have you wrestle twice on Saturday and twice on Sunday, and you take a jet, and fly from L.A. to Phoenix for the afternoon shot. And I remember taking a jet with Hulk, and we flew from Puerto Rico to Kennedy Airport. And they picked us up in a limousine. And I thought, geez, it's got to be nice to be Hulk Hogan, And the limo brought him right to his house. And his next door neighbor was David Letterman, and he lived in Connecticut. I'm thinking Greenwich, Connecticut. That's where it was. And Hulk had a beautiful house. God, he had a gym in there, and he had 2 sunbeds, and it was just a huge house, but he was just sort of in and out, because they really rode him to death. I mean,
oh yeah. Now, what was like traveling with Hulk? Was he a partier on the road, or did he keep more to himself?
He was pretty secretive. He didn't drink. He smoked some weed. That was about it. He would occasionally have a glass of wine, but he was so into training, and he trained like a fool, and he'd eat. He'd eat like 6-7 meals a day, and to maintain that body. And of course, he took steroids. I mean, everybody did. If you didn't take steroids in the WWE, you weren't going to be on the card. Because you had to look the part.
That's actually a great question. That was one of our questions I had banked here. It says, Jim, do you think wrestling is better without the steroids? And what is your opinion of the steroids?
Well, I took steroids off and on for 10, 15 years, but I took it in a clinical dose. I'd take 1 cc a week and a couple of Anavar a day. And I did that for 5 or 6 weeks. And that was the limit for the whole year. But some of these guys were, injecting a cc a night and taking 10 pills a day, and then doing this without a break. So eventually you're going to have heart problems, and then you're going to have psychological problems, because there is an aggressive attitude that's brought on by not only anabolic, but androgenic steroids. Which
just ask Tanner about that.
Yeah, the testosterone-based ones that make you strong, sort of rule your mind, and there's a lot of people that got in trouble, for flying off the handle, because of that.
All right, we got a question from El Doof. He says, "What's your opinion of the current roster? Will they stand up to the Jim Brunzell era? Like, I'm assuming that includes the traveling too."
Well, here's the deal. I don't know. I don't think the fellows now wrestle that much. I mean, they might wrestle 3-5 times a week, maybe, and then maybe have a couple days off. I might be wrong. But what I see, Joe, is that when you look at both the AEW and you look at the WWE, they're the same. I mean, they come out there, they're all braggadocious. Nobody feigns, a heel used to back up, and a babyface used to go forward. Now they're all the same, and nobody shows weakness, and everybody does a heel interview. And when you watch the product on TV, they do so much in the course of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, with all these different high spots and false finishes and this and that. and then and then they say, holy crap, you took a suplex off the top rope and you popped up like nothing happened. I mean, they don't sell what the whole premise of pro wrestling is telling a story. You tell a story between good and bad, but see, Vince never liked that. He didn't want to have a story between good and bad. He wanted to have a story of his superstars. So he'd throw people, and all of a sudden these people, not only, could you get a lunchbox that with Brutus Beefcake on it, or Greg Valentine, or whoever, Haku, but you could get T-shirts and you could get this and that. You could get baseball hats. And Hulk Hogan, I know this for a fact, in his heyday, he was making $50,000 a week on royalties.
Nice.
Plus, well, we all bought it. I had a Hulk Rules bandana. I'm sure you bought one. I loved Hogan back then.
Yeah.
I had the whole shebang, man. I had the whole shebang.
I still have one of his shirts, a couple of his shirts, and I remember when he used to have the headband that said the Hulkster. He actually bought 1,000 of those from a friend of mine that was in the business back in the early 80s. And, I don't know, they'd sell them. I don't know. They would sell them for 10 or 15 bucks. And I think they cost about $1.50, but he went through a ton of those. I mean,
I saw like hotcakes.
Okay.
Question from Blake. It says, he calls you Mr. Brunzell.
No, that's nice. He must be a lot younger.
Blake TV is very formal. If you guys don't know, Blake TV is very formal. He has two questions. One, we're just being silly. He's the total ragamuffin. We have two questions. One, are you a fan of Jim Cornette? And two, does the Iron Sheik really hate Hulk Hogan?
I've never met Jim Cornette. Never met him. I've seen him. He's gotten over. He's done well. More power to him. And I'm not sure if Khosrow, that's who the Iron Sheik is, Khosrow Vaziri. And it's funny because we just did a A&E story, a documentary on him, and people would not believe the transition Khosrow Vaziri made as a young, devout Muslim who was a great amateur, Greco-Roman wrestler in Iran. And then he got into the wrestling business, and 15 years later, holy Jesus. I mean, he was drinking a case of Heineken a day and smoking pot and this and that and beating up people. And it was hard to say, when they did this documentary, they said, what can you tell me about Khosrow? And I said, well, I can tell you 3 things about Khosrow. I said, he got me fired in North Carolina. I had the worst match I've ever had with him. And and he's the only guy that threw me out of the ring when I was almost unconscious and I cracked my skull open. I had 29 stitches in this eyebrow here. But it's funny because Khosrow and I were in North Carolina, and I was the Mid-Atlantic champion, and he wound up using this loaded boot, which he had. He tapped the boot and he kicked me, beat me 1, 2, 3. In the middle of the ring, he took the belt.
Great
gimmick. Yeah. So what happened was I'm coming back, and so I had another match on TV, and I wound up putting a sleeper on him. And when I beat him, I took the boot off and I put the boot on, and I said, "There's no way the Iron Sheik is going to beat me. I'm getting my belt back." So I wrestled Khosrow with his gimmick boot on my right foot. and the first time we wrestled, it was in Roanoke, Virginia, and it was a 3:30 afternoon shot on Sunday. So I go into the locker room, and Sandy Scott was the agent, and George Scott was the booker in North Carolina. And George, and he and his brother were from Canada, and I think they were from Calgary, and he had made his way through the AWA and found a home in North Carolina. So I said to Sandy, Sandy, what's the finish tonight between Khosrow and I, for the championship? And he says, well, didn't George tell you? And I said, no. And he says, well, he wants you to do an hour draw. And I looked at him. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, I said, you might as well dig a hole in the ground right underneath the ring, and you can bury me, because I'll be dead as a baby face, because if I can't beat Khosrow with his gimmick boot, when else can I beat him? And so it wound up about a couple weeks later, we're doing this. We were doing another supposedly hour draw in this Indian reservation in South Carolina. And we had the course of the match, and we'd gone about 25, 30 some minutes. And Khosrow took an awkward bump out onto the floor. And he got up and he says, my back's sore. My back's hurt. I hurt my back. And I thought, well, so we wound up both of us being counted out in the, so nobody won. And it's the same thing as Broadway. And, I had the boot too, but we wound up, double count out. So the next day I get a call at about 10:30 in the morning from the office. And they said, George Scott would like to have you come in. So I said, sure. So I come in, and I walked in and knocked on his door, and he said to me, Jim, he says, why didn't you do the hour draw last night in that little town? And I said, well, Khosrow got hurt, and he says, he told me he wasn't hurt. So he fired me. He says, I have to let you go. And I said, okay. So I was ready to leave North Carolina anyhow, but it was funny because I told Kaz afterwards, I says, Khosrow, why didn't you tell him the truth? And he says, then I get heat with him. And I said, well, you just got me fired, pal, Now,
what was your opinion of Khosrow's WWF title reign? Do you think it would have been longer if Vince Sr. was still in charge?
No, I don't. I never met Vince Sr., but I know that he had affinity for guys that could really wrestle. That's hence why Bob Backlund won the belt. And I think Khosrow had a great gimmick, and he worked that gimmick very well. And they milked that thing for years. And him and we wound up wrestling him and Joe Nikolai Volkov in WrestleMania 3 in the big deal in Silver Dome in Pontiac, Michigan. And 95,000 people, and the whole match was geared up. This is nobody knows this, but the whole match was geared up to get Jim Duggan over. So we had false finished the Sheik a couple different times, and in comes Nikolai to save him, and then the Sheik was false finishing us, and all of a sudden Jim Duggan runs into the ring with that 2x4, and he's hammering both Nikolai and Khosrow. So we get disqualified for having outside interference, and then we were supposed to be happy that we were supposed to applaud Jim Duggan and pat him on the back and say, thank you for saving our ass, and it didn't make sense to me at all. And I thought,
no, don't.
Wow. And they used that match to get Duggan over, and, Jim did a good job with that. Whoa, or whatever he was doing in that 2x4. Oh. There you go. I hear that. I heard that in Dallas. He was down in Dallas for that WrestleCon before WrestleMania, and I saw him, and I hadn't seen him for a long time. That's the only thing good about those things. We see guys that we haven't seen in 25 years. So.
Oh, yeah, it was great. I saw Jacques Rougeau, big friend of the show. He was sharing on Facebook. It was great. I would take his pictures and just like post them on Facebook and say, guess the wrestlers, and because people, some of the guys change over the years. It's great, man.
Yeah,
great and stuff. All right, we had a question from Lex. It's from the UK. Cheers, Lex, big friend of the show. He says, Jim, what would you say was your best match? You probably get that all the time, but what do you think?
Oh, geez. Well, there's funny because, you have good matches with everybody, in different areas, whether it be the Mid-Atlantic or whether it be the Central States or the AWA. But I'll mention 2 or 3 good matches I had with Nick Bockwinkel, who was the AWA champion. I wound up doing an hour draw with him. It was just an incredible match. Did one in Winnipeg, did one in St. Paul, and I believe I did one in Denver. It was just a great match. And Bobby Heenan was his manager, and Bobby Heenan, to me, was the greatest all-around performer, personality in wrestling during my era.
I second that.
Yeah, and also Bobby. Oh shoot, I'm getting these mental lapses now. It's the only thing, After 5,000 matches, you start thinking of Bobby Orton Jr. What a great, incredible worker. And then I had 2 or 3 great matches with Bret Hart. When we were wrestling the Hearts, I didn't particularly fancy Jim Neidhart because he was like a bull in a china cabinet. But Bret was very good. And then I'll also say Ricky Steamboat was one of the best, and Jake the Snake Roberts, who to me was one of the best heels that I'd seen because his timing was so great in the ring.
That Snake was scaring the shit out of you when you were a kid.
Yeah.
He had that match with Bad News Brown, and he had them rats and the snake. You're freaking out when you're like 10 years old.
Well, I made a trip with him, and we started in Washington, in the state of Washington, and went down all the way to San Diego. And he had that snake with him. And I had to go take a pee one night. So I'm there and I'm sitting on the toilet so I wouldn't pee on the floor. And all of a sudden I hear this, and the snake had come out of the damn tub. And his head was about that far away from me. And he was sticking his tongue out. I said, well, that's the last time we're going to have that snake in the tub. Either that or someone to make sure I go to the bathroom early before I go to bed. But yeah, Jake he was just an incredible, and I'm so glad to see that he's Diamond Dallas Page has done a wonderful thing for a couple of a number of people. God rest Scott Hall, his soul, but Dallas helped him out and also has helped Jake Roberts out.
Buff Bagwell, too, big friend of the show. He helped him out a lot recently. Buff was all up in there. It was great for him. I had a question. This is a standard question, the running joke on the show. Beatles or Queen? Who's your favorite?
Oh, Beatles by far.
Beatles. There you go. Beatles. It's Beatles for this one. All right, another standard question we got. What's your favorite Pokemon? Or do you know what Pokemon are?
No.
All right.
I don't do that. Yeah, I know the kids do, but I don't do anything with the game. This right here is to the extent of my wizardry with the
computer, right?
Yes.
I have a question for this isn't really a question, but you had a Survivor Series match in '87.
Yes,
that's the Richfield Coliseum. You got any memories at all of the Richfield Coliseum or hanging out in Cleveland?
Well, I remember that it was on Thanksgiving Day, right. And I got to tell you this because this is the way it was. I came into town and I was sharing a room with Ken Patera. So the next day we were getting up and we were going to eat we were going to have Thanksgiving meal at 10:30 or something like that. So we could all eat and we were going to have the big deal. So Kenny, during the course of the night, had got up and I heard him puking and I says, holy Jesus. I said to him, I says, Ken, are you sick? He said, I'm sicker than a dog, Brunzell. And I said, oh boy. So I thought, oh God, I hope I don't get sick. So next day we get up and he doesn't even eat the doggone Thanksgiving meal. So we eat, we don't eat a lot, but we eat the Thanksgiving meal and everything. And then, so we wound up, having that Survivor Series match. And I think, I don't know if it was that one where Brian and I were in there with Powers and Roma. I think we were the last two in there and shared it, whatever. But
first one, yeah.
But I got to tell you, I found out from a couple guys that Ken the night before was down at the bar and he had 8 White Russians. So that's why he was sick. He told me he had the flu.
That's great. That's great. All right, we got a couple more questions from the chat here. Blake also says, who would win in a real fight? Brock Lesnar, Big Van Vader, or Haku?
Haku.
Everybody
Nobody. I mean, Brock Lesnar's a tough guy. Van Vader, God rest his soul. But Haku is a natural born killer. I was in Japan with him when he was 18 years old, and he was 6'3", and he only weighed about 225 or 230 then, but he was vicious as heck. Plus, the fact that when he became, when he was 295 pounds and he was flexible and a son of a gun, I saw him one night clock 4 guys, and it was in Cleveland. It was at your wide receiver, the small wide receiver had a bar. Slaughter, was it Slaughter?
What's your Slaughter?
Yeah. Slaughter, I think that the wide receiver, the football player. Whatever it was. So we're at this bar, and there was a number of football players there. And the night before, Haku was at that bar, and these guys were slipping off to him. They weren't football players, but it's funny. So Haku, he slapped this one guy, slapped him with an open hand right in the ear, and this other guy got up and he hit him with a cuff, a chop right to the jaw, and then the other guy, he hit him right in the throat. So 3 of these guys are laying there. So I thought, holy Jesus, I hope he didn't kill it, because I mean he'd kill you, he would, and so it was funny because the Brown football players, a couple big tackles there, and they had to weigh about 300 pounds or something in there, yakking about wrestling, being phony, this and that. And Haku, he drank cognac and Coke, and he drank 2 or 3 of them, at a time. And he says, so we're sitting with him. And it was Brian Blair, myself, and somebody else. And Haku puts the drink down. He says, I'll be right back. So he walks down to this table and he sticks his head in there and he says, fellas, he says, you guys are blowing off steam just like we are. We're having a good time. He says, if I hear any more shit about wrestling, there will be trouble. That's what he said. And they didn't say nothing to him. They didn't say another word.
That is awesome, man.
And I thought, gee, because, in Montreal, I'm sure you heard that story. He got in an argument with Funk. I'm trying to think of the guy. He wrestled as Jamie Funk. Yeah, but he was from, I think he was from Oregon. What's his name? Big kid, too.
Piper? No, not Piper.
No. Jesse Barr.
Oh, okay.
So Jesse Barr made some remarks about Haku being ugly, and he said, you're not going to, and Haku said, what? And Jesse Barr, was like 6'3", 280, and he was going, blah. So Haku says, he says, I've had enough. You want to go outside? So he walked outside. He turned around. Haku hit him, picked him up, slammed him between 2 cars, and then drove his thumb right through his eye. And popped the side of his eye out. And I mean, it was, he almost lost his eye, and they had to take Jesse Barr away, and Jesse never came back to the WWE, and they suspended Haku for a couple of weeks. But I mean, he picked him up and just slammed him between 2 cars, and then as he slammed him, he came down with his thumb, just boom, right into the socket. So he was somebody that you didn't want. I tell some of my football friends, they say, well, who is the toughest guy? This and that. And I said, well, this Haku, Fafita is his real name. And I says, this guy is, and even the Islanders, all the, if he was 25 years old and he fought with Brock Lesnar, he would kill him. Brock Lesnar was a great wrestler, and supposedly, he did okay in the MI, mixed martial arts. But
Yeah.
when you have a guy, who's a killer. I mean, Haku's a killer. I mean, if you turn his switch, he won't stop. I mean, he ain't going to stop until you're unconscious. And I remember one time it took, I can't remember how many cops, they wouldn't he said, I can't let you handcuff me. They wanted to handcuff him. And they sprayed him with mace, and the whole side of his face was burnt. And they hit him with a billy club and still couldn't knock him down. But one cop finally kicked him in the balls, and he went down. But they still didn't handcuff him.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. All right, speaking of Andre, well, not speaking of Andre, but Haku wrestled with Andre. Did you ever team up or wrestle Andre the Giant?
I was in the ring with Andre on 2 or 3 different occasions in battle royals. We were the last 2 guys, and he and I had a little deal that what would happen if there was 2 or 3 heels left, he would position me in front of him, and he'd pick me up underneath the arms and bring me up in the air. And as these guys came, I'd drop kick them. Boom, and they go out of the ring, So there was a couple times that actually, I think it was Peoria, Illinois. Yeah.
Was that WrestleMania 2?
WrestleMania 2. I think that was in Chicago, wasn't
it? Somewhere in Illinois. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Chicago, and it was a big battle royal. Matter of fact, I've got a big picture with all the guys, and they had football players in it, and I'm trying to think of they had Refrigerator Perry and a couple other guys. Haku was in it too. Yeah, but Andre, it was tough being a giant. I mean, people don't realize that when you stick out as much as he did, and I tell this, we used to have these Halliburton metal suitcases that was the brand of suitcase that all the boys used to, have their wrestling gear in.
Yeah.
So Andre would have this suitcase, and then he had a bumper sticker on the suitcase, and as he got off the plane, he'd hold this suitcase out in front of him, and it said, "If you get too close, I'll fart." That's what he had on there. So the people would they wanted to see Andre, and all of a sudden he'd hold this thing up and walk, and it was like Jesus spreading the water, the crowd. But he was such a good guy to me. And I remember real quick story, I took him out. I wanted to take care, he was always good to me. And there was a place in Winnipeg, Canada, and it was called Chez Andre. It was a French little restaurant, and they were open for lunch, and they had great specials. They had this little pork cutlet, and it was like $8.99, and he had the whole meal with it. So I told him, I said, Andre, I want to bring you to Chez Andre. And he said, okay, boss. So we go and sit down, and he has 2 shots of Remy Martin, and then he had a bottle of wine, and then we had our $8.99 pork cutlet, and then the bill was $120, and he gave it to me, and I looked and I thought, geez, the bottle of wine was like $60-$75, and the 2 cognacs were $15 a piece, and here's the meal. So I told him, I says, Andre, I says, next time, I says, we go out to dinner, I says, you buy the booze, I buy the meal. He says, okay, boss.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. All right, we got a question from Mick. He's in the UK as well. Who was the best British Bulldog or Rowdy Piper?
Roddy Piper was hard. He was from Winnipeg, Canada, and British Bulldog. He was a good guy. Doggone it. Here's another guy who died way too young. He got hooked on painkillers, and that was it. And Davey Boy was a great guy, really, really good. But Roddy Piper, he was one in a million. One thing that Roddy Piper did that was probably one of 3 type of wrestlers can say this, is he manipulated his way all the way to the top wherever he was. He, he had a mind, and he grew up in Winnipeg. He was a tough son of a gun too, and then wound up living in Oregon, and he had an enormous tolerance for pharmaceuticals. And it was just too bad, I mean, I know he died of a heart attack, but he was really young. He was like in his late 50s at the most. And he was incredible. I mean, he talked, and one thing about Roddy, he was like 6 feet and 215, 220. He wrestled like he was 330 pounds. I mean, he was knocking guys out, and he probably was really knocking them out, but he was a terror in the ring.
Yeah. All right, question from JV. He says, in your opinion, what's the best and worst parts of the wrestling industry?
Well, I feel very fortunate that I survived the business intact, even though I just had my 10th surgery. I've had both shoulders replaced, both knees, and one hip. So I'd say the best thing about wrestling is that you got to meet a bunch of great guys, and you got to live a fancy life with them and get paid well. The real downfall about wrestling is that you're taken advantage of because you have no idea how much money they're making. I mean, we were talking about having a union, in the early 80s, and the only way a union would work in pro wrestling is if Hulk Hogan would have been captain, gone with it.
Right.
But the problem is that Hulk Hogan would have been affected adversely by a union. He wouldn't be making the 50 grand a week or, 10 million a year like he did in 1985. But it's just, I think you have to be pretty good in your resolve. Otherwise, there's so many temptations in wrestling, and whether it be, the booze or the drugs or just, being away, it's not the best for conducive for a good family life. I was blessed because my wife was so good with the kids and ran my business when I was gone. But, I was fortunate in that respect, but a lot of guys weren't. I mean, I remember Cosro, this is funny. He was gone so many times or so many days in a row. I think it was 91. He came back to his house it was in Georgia, and his wife had renovated the house on the outside, and he drove right by the house. He didn't recognize it because she spent about $50,000 redoing the front of the house. And he said, that's not my house.
I've done that, but I mean, not because of a renovation. I've been drunk and went to the wrong house.
I actually did that coming here. I went to the wrong house.
Well, there you go. So this is happening. This is happening on a daily basis. This is awesome. I love it.
It does happen.
We got a question from Captain. He's also from the UK. Like half our audience is from the UK. We love you guys. We're going out to the UK in October. Don't forget. He says, Jim, have you ever encountered anyone in the business that you hated? Hate's a strong word, but
I don't think I hated anybody. I think I had my preference for people that I like to work with, and I think the hardest person to me to work with in the WWE was Jim Neidhart. He was 5'9.5", 272, and he was like a bull. I mean, he was another one that that loved his pharmaceuticals, and he was on a hell bent for election, and he used to hate my drop kick. He said, Jimmy, don't hit me in the face with the drop. I said, Jim, put your hand up like that when you come off the ropes, and I'll hit your hand. So he'd come off the ropes and he'd shy away. I'll never forget one time. I think we were in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh or Philadelphia. So I'm making a comeback on him. I'm going to hit him with a drop kick, and I throw him in. I jump up really high, and he pulls away from the drop kick, so he sort of falls down, and my feet go over his head, and my feet came down, and the heel of my boot hits him right here, and puts a big welt and a little bit of blood out. And he got up. He thought I hit him with the drop kick in the face on purpose. So I went to pick him up, and he hit me so hard in the stomach, I thought he disrupted my spinal column. That's how hard he hit me. And I lost complete air, and I turned to Bret and I said, "Bret, get in here immediately." So Bret saved the match, but I said to Jim, I said, "Jesus, Jim, what's going on?" He said, "Jimmy, sometimes I just can't control myself." And I said, "I see that." So he was fairly hard to work with.
Now, who was the better wrestler, Bret Hart or Owen Hart, in your opinion?
Oh, Owen could do a lot of stuff, but for my liking, Bret was really good. Bret was really solid. Owen could do a lot of the high maneuvers and flipping around and everything, and he was a lovely person. I mean, he and I made some trips together, and he was just a real sweetheart of a kid. And it was just a utter shame that, that his downfall could be from, not being wired, or, harnessed in right. And he does this thing and boom, kills himself. It was totally, it just was uncalled for. Should have never happened.
Kind of mind-boggling when you think about it.
It is.
How do you double check something so fucking simple?
Yeah, well, I mean, it just the whole deal of it, to come out of the doggone rafters and come into the ring. I mean, come on. I mean, the rock stars are doing it, and they'll come up and Pink will come down in a trapeze and stuff like that, but. And then he was so conscientious. He wanted to do everything right and wanted to make sure it went good. And he was so, this is the way he was really. So he probably thought he was snapped on, and he wasn't, and over he went, and it was just a horrible tragedy.
Oh, yeah, from my understanding, he was very hesitant about that all day. Now, how would you respond if one of the bookers or agents came up to you and asked you to lower down in a harness?
I would have said, you know what, that's not my gimmick. I propel myself by my feet jumping up. I'm not. I don't think. I don't think they would have asked me, for one thing. But physically, I'm afraid of heights, so I wouldn't have been partial to that at all.
All right, let's get to the Killer Bees now. Where did you meet B. Brian Blair? Did you meet him beforehand? Did you want to come into New York, to be a singles guy? How did you get hooked up in the tag team stuff?
Well, here's the deal. Hulk had left Minneapolis. Hulk and I were good friends. I liked him. Terry and I had him over to my house, and just a real good guy. And, I had my gym, and he used to come into my gym at night, and I'd give him the keys, and he'd work out when he could. And what had happened was, when I told him, I said, I'm going to come to New York. And, everybody wants to be a single if they can, because you can make more, more money. At that time, Brian Blair was coming in, from Florida, and they had thought, well, I had success, with tag team with Greg Gagne, and also Mike George in Kansas City when I first started. So they thought of the idea of putting Brian and I together. And then we were up in Ontario, Toronto, a little town. And one of the guys, the old timers there, had mentioned, that we should, possibly, wear masks, because nobody wore masks, especially baby faces. So what happened was, Brian came up with the Killer Bees, which was the defensive backfield or for the Miami Dolphins back in the 70s. They were called, every one of them had their name started with B, so the Killer Bees, what was logical, for Brunzell and Blair. So they called us the Killer Bees. And then it turned out that Lanny Poffo had some black and yellow tights, and he had just got them. He never wore them, so he had 2 pairs. So Brian and I put these damn things on, and before we know it, we had the mask, and it got over because there was no baby faces that ever wore a mask, to win a match. And here,
I think you guys were the first ones, to my knowledge.
Yeah, we were, to be baby faces and get away with it. And there we were sort of led astray by Vince, and thinking that we were going to get the belts, and eventually we could have been heels with those masks too, because like we had said earlier, nobody had ever done it. Nobody had worn masks as far as baby faces to get themselves over or to win a match, whereas the heels, would do the masks, especially, so many of the luchadors, they all wear masks, so it's hard to tell who's who. But it was a great idea, and it went good until they had a 8-man tag in New York, and it was, I'll never forget this. Ooh. It was the Hearts and somebody else against, it was Brian and I, and it was Coco Beware and George the Animal Steel. So,
wow.
At the end of the match, you got to picture this. All 4 of us have got the masks on. Coco's dancing with his bird in the corner, and George Steele had his mask on sideways, and he's trying to bite the turnbuckle through the mask. And then Brian and I are looking at each other, and I said to Brian, I says, well, that's the end of the Killer Bees, because, nothing's going to kill a gimmick when, you have 2 other guys wear masks that are just, they made a big, comedy act out of it.
I love it. Lanny Poffo also finished. I got to ask you about Lanny Poffo. Lanny Poffo was hilarious. Was he that crazy? And just, the only word I can describe him, he's just a weird fella. Is he like that? He's a nice guy. He's just a little eccentric. What do you think?
He was a great guy, nice guy, very talented, and he was good at what he could do. He could come out and recite things and make things up, but
very underrated.
Yeah, but here's the deal: when you're when you're Macho Man's brother, it's pretty hard, to compare and to compete. But Lanny did a good job. He did what was asked of him. I'm sure he made some good money. I've seen him around. I don't know where. I know he used to live in Long Island, but now
I actually follow him because he was. We had him on in 2020, like this summer. He was in. We had the last interview he did. He was in St. Pete, and he moved to Ecuador. He's in Ecuador now.
Oh, is he really? Yeah, jeez. Well, good for him. I hope he's happy. I always got along with him. He was a real nice guy, and he did the best he could, with being Randy's brother. And they were, I'll say one thing, they were frugal as ever. Those guys, I think they made their, they still had their first nickel they ever made, which is a real rarity in pro wrestling.
The cheap Poffos, I love it. All right, Blake asks, do you watch AEW? If so, what do you think of Kenny Omega? Is he really, according to PWI, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the best wrestler in the world?
Okay, Kenny Omega, that is Don Callis, isn't it? Isn't he a manager?
Yeah.
Okay, he's Don Callis from Winnipeg. Don Callis, matter of fact, my last couple matches, I worked a couple matches with him. He was a young heel, good-looking, long-haired guy, and not very big, but he was very good in the ring. He did some work. Yeah, he did some real good work with the WWE, and I think he might have been with some of the writing crew. But to me, I don't watch AEW, but I know he's done a good job there, and a lot of people talk about him, but I know he's sort of patterned himself after Bobby Heenan in a lot of ways. And some mannerisms. And one thing I like about Don's attitude is that he doesn't like to give things away. Like he doesn't want to take abuse from anybody if the fans don't pay to see it.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense, because, back when we first started, a heel would do something and all of a sudden the baby face would start to, make a comeback and then sort of satisfy the people. And at the same time, they're taking money away from both the heel and the baby face because the people see that on TV rather than pay their, $15 to see ringside.
Yeah.
So sort of defeats the idea. So I think Don or Kenny Omega, I wish him the best. He's a really a good, talented kid, and he could work too. He could wrestle.
Okay. All right, we got a question from Captain. He says, Jim, what did you think about the whole Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler thing back in the day?
Well, matter of fact, they did the same thing. Andy Kaufman came to Chicago, and he sat in the locker room, and he sat completely quiet, didn't say a word. And then he did his thing with the King, and I can't remember. I think they gave him a pile driver and hurt him or something. But he was a fan. He was a fan, big fan. And I think that, there's so many things that have happened in wrestling that people say, Jesus, why did they do that? But people talked about it and people paid money to see it. So in the end, it served its purpose. I thought Andy Kaufman was a brilliant comic. He died. Another guy died way before his time. But, he found a little niche and Lawler was sharp enough to use that. And I always thought Jerry, the King, he was about 215 pounds and he wrestled like he was 300. He was go-cocking people and he got over in Memphis and he was the King.
He used to have, I remember back in PWI back in the 80s, he used to have a picture of like him at a table and he would have belts from all these different territories, like 9 of them. Like this.
Yeah.
It's the King. It was great. It was great. All right, we got a question from Blake. He says, do you have any Bobby the Brain Heenan stories?
Oh, my God. Bobby the Brain, like I said, was probably the number one talent in my era. And I'll say this, Bobby only went to 8th grade. He had to quit to make a living for his mom and who he still lived with. And he used to work for the Bruiser in Indianapolis, Dick Afflis, and he'd carry jackets back to the locker room. And then he looked at wrestling and he sort of found his niche, and he was incredible. And he to me, I'll tell you one story. He was a horrible alcoholic. He was that way all of his life, but and he could drink vodka, and it was funny because the more he drank, the funnier he was, and he could perform that way. So I remember Denver was on Friday night. We flew back to Minneapolis on Saturday morning, and we'd do TV from 12 until 4:30, and then we'd wind up doing a taped show, and then we'd fly out that night to either go to Chicago or Milwaukee to wrestle that night. So Bobby comes over to where Vern Gagne and Wally Carbo were looking at the program and seeing where everybody fit in as far as interviews. And Bobby had Nick Bockwinkel and he had Bobby Duncombe and Jack Lanza, so Bobby walked over there and leaned over to see where his men were positioned, for the interviews. So as he's looking, all of a sudden, Vern Gagne looked back at him and he says, Heenan, he says, you've been drinking. And Bobby looked at him and he says, you can't smell vodka. And he walked away. And everybody laughed about that, but that's the way he was. He was, oh God. He used to, we had to fly this 7-seat passenger prop plane, and it could only fly at 6,000 feet. And Bobby and I used to sit in the back of the plane, and he said, would you like wine or rum? And he'd have a big bottle of wine, and then he'd have a bottle of rum for the way home. But he was scared to death, and we'd lock arms in the back seat because this pilot who used to fly this small plane, he was a Air Force pilot. He never deviated between 2 points. So if Minneapolis was here and Milwaukee was here, and there was a thunderstorm in the way, he'd go right through it,
Wow.
and the plane would be up in the air and down and jump, and Bobby'd say, "Oh God, I remember there was so many horrible flights that Bobby jump as soon as he could jump down on the ground, he jumped down and he'd go and kiss the ground, and happy that he was alive." But he there was all different things about Bobby. He was just, I'll tell you a real quick story. I'm wrestling Bobby Duncombe, and it's at Indian Red Lake Indian Reservation, and there were all the Native Americans were in this auditorium. So we're trying to wrestle, and they sat and watched like this. Nobody reacted to nothing. So Bobby Duncombe and I we're having an up and down match, and we're trying to, get the people to react somehow or other. So I'm sitting, we went about 15, 20 minutes, and we're trying everything, and the crowd was just sort of, so Bobby is sitting there. Meanwhile, Bobby Duncombe is choking me, and the referee goes to push Bobby Duncombe back. Meanwhile, Bobby Heenan is sitting there, and I'm selling, getting my neck. So I got my head right over the ring. He takes his Coke and he throws it in my face, and he says, "This is the boringest match I've ever seen. I'm going back to the locker room." And so he got up and left, and I'm sitting there, had to wrestle the rest of the match, which was with Coca-Cola all over my head and chest. I was furious. And he came back after the match. I said, "God damn," and he had me laughing. But it was just something that, not many people could get away with, but he could.
That's great. All right, Captain. Also, two quick questions. He says,
okay,
do you have a preference of wrestling style to work with? I'm assuming he's like saying, would you rather like do a Greco, what's the scientific style, or
so many guys, the heels, they chop meat. That's what they call, chopping meat. Bing, 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 and then you only can do that for so long, and then you got to have a finish. Whereas if you have wrestling holds where you outsmart the heel and you got a hold on him, and then he follows you and gets a hold, and then you reverse him, and then you tell a story. So to me, I was much better attuned at doing that in the matches. And that's the way almost all the matches were. Back, everybody told a story, and I saw guys, do an hour draw, and all of a sudden, I was watching it and like a real mark saying, "Holy God, this is a hell of a match," and right. now people wouldn't, I'm glad for the guys now working because they're making good money, the only problem is that I as a former wrestler, when I watch those matches, I can't tell, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, or if it's a good match or not, because it's all the same.
Yeah. Now, who in your era do you think would have made it in today's era, and then vice versa? Who from today's era do you think would have made it back in your day?
Oh gosh. Well, I think anybody in my era would have made it today because they just would have changed their style. Randy Orton, to me, although he gets a little carried away, I thought he was probably the best worker in the WWE right now. And then Jeff, I can't think of is it Owens? Jeff Owens?
Kevin Owens.
Kevin Owens. He's the other guy that I think holds a little better status in terms of working. AEW, I can't tell. I haven't watched it enough, but those two guys in the WWE, I think are head and shoulders above the other guys.
Now, did you guys at any point, because back then everybody had like the British Bulldogs had a bulldog, Jake the Snake Roberts had a snake. Did you guys ever think to come down to the ring with a bunch of bees? It's like,
no,
hey, here's
never.
my killer bees. And just, at least you're finishing move, you just throw the bees
No,
at the guy.
that would have really doomed us. I don't think we, our hardest thing was trying to find music to come by, to go to the ring with, because, you couldn't get people to let them use their music unless you paid them. They all had that royalty. So we were coming to the ring at the very end. And I think the band, I'm trying to think of the name of the band, but I'll think about it about 1:00 tonight, fellas. So I'll have to call you tomorrow. But we just, whatever music they put, everybody had music that they, as soon as the fan heard the music, they recognized, well, this is going to be Hulk Hogan's, or this is going to be, Ken Patera's, or
man.
Yeah. So, it's all part of the showbiz. And now when they play that music, the crowd knows exactly who's coming.
Yeah.
So what you been doing with yourself these days? Post shutdown? Are you retired now?
I'm retired, and it's like I say, I had to postpone this shoulder replacement surgery I had, and I've been waiting for it for 2.5 years, and it got to the point where I couldn't put on a shirt. So what happened was I went in for the physical, and I had a heart flutter, so they wanted to make sure I didn't have anything matter with my heart, so I had to postpone it for 3 months. And finally in April or February, I finally got the damn surgery, and now I have a resulting problem where I have nerve damage in my hand. So I have very little strength in this hand. So I'm seeing a therapist. But, I wrestled 27 years all total. And most of the guys that had, in that same era, the only one it's surprising who hasn't had any replacement is Ric Flair.
Wow.
I know what he's waiting for. He's waiting for a brain replacement and hoping, and hoping things will change out different in the next life. But, he was certainly took a ton of bumps, and it's just that I use my elbows as shock absorbers when I come down from the drop kick, and then it'd jam your shoulder up. So I ruined my shoulder joints. They were all calcified with big chunks of, calcium in there. So, they're pretty soon you lose range of motion.
So you basically blame the drop kicks for all of your shoulder injuries.
I do, because I'd come down, and I'd drop kick every night,
Right.
And so, I'd come down from 6-7 feet in the air, and, my body weight, I weighed about 225. You come down and you have to break that fall somehow. And at first it didn't bother me, but towards the end, I could feel that, I was doing damage to my shoulder joint. So what are you going to do?
Now, we haven't seen a lot of drop kicks in wrestling lately. Do you have like a particular favorite performer that does a drop kick, or are they basically all the same?
Well, I haven't seen really. I know Randy Orton could throw a nice drop kick, but I see now guys will do something like they'll flying mirror a guy over, and he'll be on his ass sitting there, and they'll drop kick him in the face, you know. And I thought, geez, well, so whatever rings their bell. But I've seen a couple of these young guys that can do a drop kick, but at the same time, if a drop kick is done properly and done well enough, I mean, you should get at least a 1 or 2 count out of it before a guy kicks off. kicks out, because, if I laid some guys out. Some guys were, not, ready for my drop kick, and I'd hit them in the chin, and boom, it'd blow their feet out, and they'd land on their head, and they'd shake their head and say, "Oh," and so, but I'd warn guys. I'd say, please, put your hand up by your face like that, so you can, block that kick, because I remember, and you can see this right now. Somebody said I had the.
Oh, he said, in Blake's opinion, you got the second best drop kick. Kurt Hennig was by far his fave.
Well, Kurt could jump it. Kurt, let's see. Kurt had a nice drop kick, but to be honest with you, heels shouldn't throw drop kicks because it's a babyface move. But I forgot what I was going to tell you before that. What was I trying to say?
So, drop kicks, blocking the face.
Yeah.
Did anyone ever try to drop kick you?
Haku.
Oh, wow.
He drop kicked me in Japan when he was 18 years old, and I came flying off the ropes, and he caught me in the chin and right in the throat, and he covered me, and I looked at him after I kicked out. I said, I'm supposed to give those to you, not take them. And he looked at me real strange. But yeah, he was good guy, great guy.
It's great. All right, Doris channel says, any tag teams you wish you could have faced as the Killer Bees with Blair. So basically, any tag teams you wish you could have faced. I'm assuming at any time.
Oh gosh. Well, outside of the WWE, I mean, there was teams that Greg and I wrestled with as high flyers, Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens, and Bobby Duncombe and Jack Lanza. They were all great tag teams. And Greg and I went down to Atlanta, and we were supposed to work with Dickie Slater and Bob Orton Jr., who were a hell of a heel tag team. And we had one match with them, and it was just, we stole the show. And we never got booked with them again. We were down there 2 weeks, and we wound up working with the babyface. We worked with Bob Backlund and Jerry Briscoe a couple times and had good matches, but sort of defeated our purpose of coming down there, wanting to work with some of the heels. But they, it was, any time that you could get in the ring and have a good match. And that was funny, because the difference between the AWA and the WWE, when the AWA, they had 16 guys, 12 to 16 guys. Everybody knew their position. Everybody worked hard every night. Everybody made money. Everybody got over. In the WWE, everybody was afraid to look weak, because they thought if they looked weak, they wouldn't draw. So nobody was selling stuff. So consequently, it was like pulling teeth without Novocaine, to have a good match, and you'd say, geez, fellas, we're going to give you, you're going to get plenty of heat on us. Just make sure that we get a fiery comeback. So that was the difference. And it was funny because, Vince McMahon and the people on top never told you what to, I still don't think Vince knew. But I was going to, I wanted to mention this, mention something. You can see this on YouTube right now. There was a match between Randy Savage and myself, and it was, I wound up putting them over, and it was towards the end when I'd been fired, my second or third time. But if you watch this match, you'll see in the very beginning, I got Randy's arm, and he throws me and drops down, and he comes across, and I hit him with the drop kick, and he comes up spitting blood. I hit him right in the mouth, and I thought, oh boy, here we go. But he and I had a hell of a match, and I took that flying elbow off the top rope. That was the first time I ever took that, boy. And I tell you, that comes down. He only weighed about 215, but boy, you could feel it when it landed on your chest. But that was a hell of a match, and it was funny because when we came out of the ring, Vince McMahon was right there, and he said, he said, fellas, I just want to say that was one of the best matches I've ever seen. Now, I don't know if he said that to anybody else, but it sort of made us feel good, because we did work our ass off.
Yeah.
Right. I just looked up, said 1990. It's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you for joining us, Mr. Jim Brunzell. This is awesome, man. It was really
Well,
great.
I appreciate it.
Down memory lane. I love it, man. We love wrestling around here. Thanks to Mr. Rickman for coming out to join us Sunday. We're going to have this guy from UK named Andrew Eborn. I got to look up some stuff about him, but it was a pleasure, sir. I really appreciate it, my friend.
Peace. God bless you
Bye.
guys. Take
Take it
care.
easy, guys.
Bye.
All right.
Bye now.